Karen, the gray light of morning seeped through the van's curtains, a dull, uninspiring filter on a world that had, lately, felt equally muted. I lay still, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me, the familiar rhythm a counterpoint to the restless churn in my own gut. Another day. Another campsite that was more functional than beautiful, this one a gravel patch behind a tired-looking petrol station somewhere in inland Portugal. We'd pulled in late, exhausted after wrestling with a dodgy alternator belt for 2 days. That was fixed now, thankfully, but the residue of frustration, of grease under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase, lingered. Karen, morning, love, Mark mumbled, his voice thick with sleep as he stirred. He stretched, his arm brushing mine, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of the old warmth, the easy companionship that had been the bedrock of this whole mad adventure. But it was quickly overshadowed by a weary sigh that seemed to emanate from my very bones. Karen, morning, I replied, trying to inject a cheerfulness I didn't feel. He'd be up and at it in a minute, making coffee, checking maps, full of the indefatigable optimism that, if I were honest with myself, was starting to grate. How could he still be so relentlessly enthusiastic when all I felt was, tired? Tired of the constant motion, tired of the cramped space, tired of problems that always seemed to crop up just when you thought you were cruising. Mark, Karen was quiet this morning. Quieter than usual. I propped myself up on an elbow, watching her as she stared at the ceiling of Vasco, our trusty, if sometimes temperamental, home on wheels. There were new lines of tension around her eyes, a slight downturn to her mouth that hadn't been there a few months ago, or maybe I just hadn't noticed. This alternator business had been a pain, no doubt about it. 2 days of grime and knuckle scraping, ending with us smelling like a mechanic's workshop. Mark, coffee? I asked, aiming for breezy. I'll get the good stuff out. The fancy beans we were saving. Karen, he was trying, I knew. And I loved him for it. But even the promise of fancy beans couldn't lift the fog. Sure, I said, managing a weak smile. As he maneuvered his way to the tiny kitchenette, I thought about our old life. The house with the garden, my pottery studio, the comfortable routine. We'd traded it all for this, for freedom, for adventure, for living fully, as our little tagline went. And for a long time, it had been exactly that. Glorious, breathtaking, transformative. But lately, the living fully part felt more like coping constantly. Mark, the aroma of coffee soon filled the small space, a rich, comforting smell that usually worked its magic. I handed Karen her favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim from that time in the Pyrenees when a rogue goat had tried to investigate our breakfast table. She took it with a quiet, thanks. Mark, so, I began, spreading a map across the tiny pull-out table, its creases worn soft with use. I was thinking, we're not too far from the coast. The Algarve. Remember those pictures? The cliffs, the sea stacks. We could head south, find a proper nice spot, maybe watch the sunset over the Atlantic. What do you reckon? I kept my tone light, casual, but I was watching her, hoping for a spark. Karen, the Algarve. Sunsets. It sounded lovely, objectively. But a part of me, a traitorous, weary part, just thought, another long drive, another search for a decent place to park, another day of being unsettled. I traced the coastline on the map with my finger. It's a fair way, I said, noncommittally. Karen, not so bad, Mark countered, already tracing a potential route. We can take it easy. Maybe find a little fishing village. Fresh seafood for dinner. He knew my weaknesses. But even the thought of grilled sardines didn't quite ignite the usual enthusiasm. Karen, the truth was, a bigger thought had been taking root in my mind, a terrifying, liberating, and utterly disruptive thought. Maybe this wasn't for me anymore. Maybe I wasn't cut out for perpetual motion. Maybe, just maybe, I wanted to go home. Not visit. Go home. The words felt like a betrayal, even in the privacy of my own head. We'd invested so much in this, emotionally, financially. Our friends thought we were living the dream. And we had been. But what if the dream had run its course for one of us? We packed up the van in a practiced, almost silent routine. The pre-trip checks, stowing loose items, the satisfying clunk of the sliding door. Vasco rumbled to life, a familiar, reassuring sound, yet today it felt like the start of another obligation rather than an adventure. As we pulled out of the gravel lot, leaving the petrol station fumes behind, Karen, stared out the window, the flat, unremarkable landscape mirroring my mood. Mark, on the other hand, was humming softly, already in his element. Mark, I glanced over at Karen. She was staring out the window, a faraway look in her eyes. Penny for them? I asked gently. Karen, I forced a smile. Just thinking. About stuff, how could I even begin to voice the enormity of what I was feeling? How do you tell the person you love, your partner in this grand escapade, that you might want to call the whole thing off? It's been a bit rough, the last few weeks, hasn't it? I offered instead, a pale imitation of my true thoughts. Mark, a bit, I conceded. But we always muddle through, don't we? That's part of the adventure. Remember that time in Italy with the flat tire in the middle of nowhere, and that lovely old farmer towed us with his tractor and his wife fed us pasta while we waited for the recovery truck? I chuckled at the memory. Turned into one of our best stories. Karen, I did remember. And it had been a good story, eventually. But right now, I didn't feel like collecting any more stories that started with breakdowns or disasters. I just wanted ease. A little predictability. Was that so wrong, after 50+ years of striving and achieving? Hadn't I earned a bit of quiet comfort? The drive south was uneventful, thankfully. The landscape gradually began to change, the arid inland plains giving way to gentle hills dotted with olive groves and whitewashed villages. The air started to taste saltier as we neared the coast. Mark pointed out interesting landmarks, shared little snippets from the guidebook, and I, Karen, tried to engage, to match his energy, but it felt like wading through treacle. Karen, my internal monologue was a relentless loop. This is beautiful, Karen, appreciate it. Look at those stork nests on the church tower. Isn't this what you wanted? But another voice, quieter, more insidious, whispered, it's just another view. It'll be gone tomorrow. And what will you have to show for it, apart from more miles on the clock and a longing for your own damn teacup? Mark, we stopped for lunch in a small town, finding a little bakery that sold baifanas, those delicious Portuguese pork sandwiches. We ate them sitting on a stone bench in a sun-dappled square, watching locals go about their day. Karen seemed a little more relaxed, and I allowed myself a sliver of hope that her mood was lifting. Mark, see? I said, nudging her playfully. Not so bad, is it? Good food, sunshine. Karen, the bifana is good, I admitted. And it was. The pork was tender, marinated in garlic and wine, the bread crusty. Small pleasures. They were still there, if I allowed myself to notice them. But the bigger ache remained. I felt like I was performing, playing the role of the happy Vanlifer, while inside, I was wrestling with a fundamental unhappiness. Karen, as we continued our journey, the signs for Praia, this and Praia, that, beach, 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 became more frequent. The prospect of the ocean, usually a balm to my soul, felt strangely distant. We were aiming for a spot Mark had read about, a viewpoint on the cliffs near Sagres, legendary for its sunsets. Cabo de São Vicente, he announced. The southwesternmost point of continental Europe. They used to think it was the end of the world. Karen, the end of the world. It had a certain appeal right now. Or at least, the end of this particular chapter. The thought, once terrifying, now held a sliver of relief. I pushed it down. Guilt immediately followed. Mark was so invested, so happy. How could I do this to him, to us? We, The landscape became wilder, more dramatic as we approached the coast. The vegetation grew sparse, sculpted by the relentless Atlantic winds. And then, there it was, the vast, endless expanse of the ocean, a brilliant, steely blue under the afternoon sun. Even in my funk, Karen, had to admit it was impressive. Mark, wow, I breathed, pulling Vasco into a dusty parking area already dotted with other campervans. Wow, the cliffs were immense, dropping sheer to the churning sea below. A lighthouse stood sentinel on the point, a beacon of stark white against the deep blue. The air was alive with the cries of gulls and the thunderous boom of waves crashing against rock. This was it. This had to do the trick. Karen, it was undeniably spectacular. A raw, elemental beauty. Other people were milling about, cameras at the ready, a quiet hum of anticipation in the air. We found a spot a little away from the main throng, on a weathered patch of earth overlooking a precipice. Mark got out the camping chairs, set them up facing west. I sat down, feeling the cool wind on my face, whipping strands of hair across my eyes. Karen, he didn't press me for conversation, just sat beside me, his presence a familiar comfort, even amidst my turmoil. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. A simple gesture, but it sent a fresh wave of conflict through me. This man, this life, how could I even contemplate walking away? Mark, the sun began its slow descent, painting the underside of a few wispy clouds in shades of apricot and rose. The sea, which had been a vibrant blue, started to shimmer with silver and gold. I could feel Karen next to me, still quiet, but her grip on my hand had tightened, almost imperceptibly. I risked a glance. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, her expression unreadable. Karen, I watched the sun, a blazing orb, sink towards the watery edge of the world. And as it did, something began to shift within me. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic epiphany, more like a gentle unfurling. The colors intensified, deepening from pale pastels to fiery oranges, crimsons, and violets that bled into the darkening sky. Each shade seemed to vibrate with an impossible intensity. The vastness of it all, the sheer, unadulterated beauty, was overwhelming. Karen, my breath caught in my throat. It was as if the universe was putting on a display specifically for me, a silent, powerful argument against the grayness that had enveloped my spirit. The petty frustrations of the past few weeks, the alternator, the cramped quarters, the longing for a proper bath, began to shrink, to recede in the face of this monumental spectacle. Karen, I thought of all the sunsets we'd seen on this journey. The soft, hazy ones over Scottish lochs, the vibrant, dramatic ones in the Moroccan desert, the gentle, lingering ones over Tuscan hills. Each one unique, each one a gift. And this one felt like a culmination, a turning point. It wasn't just pretty, it was profound. It spoke of immensity, of continuity, of a beauty that transcended the everyday struggles. Mark, the air grew cooler as the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky stained with glorious afterglow. A hush had fallen over the crowd. People stood in silence, or spoke in whispers, mesmerized. I looked at Karen again. And this time, I saw it. A softening around her eyes, a trace of moisture. Not sadness, but something else. Awe, perhaps. Relief? Karen, tears welled, unbidden, and spilled onto my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, or even frustration anymore. They were tears of recognition. A recognition of what I had almost allowed myself to forget, to devalue. The freedom to witness moments like this. The sheer privilege of being able to chase the horizon, to place ourselves in the path of such staggering beauty. This was why we did it. This was the living fully part, in its purest, most potent form. Karen, the knot in my stomach, the one that had been tightening for weeks, began to loosen. The arguments I'd been rehearsing in my head, the justifications for wanting to quit, suddenly seemed flimsy, almost churlish, when set against the backdrop of that incandescent sky. Yes, van life was challenging. Yes, there were days when I missed comfort and predictability. But what life, lived with any passion, was without its challenges? Mark, she turned to me then, her face illuminated by the dying light, her eyes shining. And she smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners, the kind I hadn't seen for too long. Mark, she said, her voice a little choked. Thank you. Mark, for what, love? I asked, my heart swelling. Karen, for this, I whispered, gesturing towards the magnificent, fading panorama. For, reminding me. We sat there for a long time, hand in hand, as the colors slowly drained from the sky, replaced by the velvety indigo of twilight and the first hesitant stars. The other vans started their engines, their headlights cutting swathes through the darkness as they departed. But we stayed, wrapped in our blankets against the growing chill, the silence between us no longer strained, but comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. Karen, later, back in the cozy confines of Vasco, with the small gas heater hissing softly, I finally found the words. I was close to giving up, Mark, I confessed, the admission hanging in the warm air. On this. On van life. I've been feeling, so tired of it all. So ready to just, stop. Mark, I listened, my earlier elation giving way to a more sober understanding. I hadn't realized it had gone that deep. I felt a pang of guilt for my own relentless optimism, wondering if it had made it harder for her to voice her doubts. Oh, Karen, I said softly, reaching for her hand again. Why didn't you say something sooner? I mean, really say it. Karen, I didn't know how, I admitted, looking down at our joined hands. It felt like admitting failure. Like I was letting you down, letting us down. We've built this whole life, this dream. And part of me felt so ungrateful for even thinking about wanting something else, something easier. Mark, it's not a failure to feel tired, or to question things, I said, squeezing her hand. This isn't always easy. I know that. I have my moments too, you know. Days when I miss a big workshop, or just being able to spread out. But then. Karen, then a sunset like tonight happens, I finished for him, a small smile playing on my lips. And it sort of, recalibrates everything. I looked around our little home on wheels. The familiar curve of the ceiling, the books tucked into their custom-built shelves, the slightly faded photo of our grandkids taped above the sink. It wasn't a conventional home, but it was ours. And it was the vehicle, quite literally, that had brought us to so many moments of wonder. Mark, exactly, I said. It's about the balance, isn't it? The tough bits make the beautiful bits shine even brighter. And we're a team, Karen. If one of us is struggling, we talk about it. We figure it out. Together. If you truly wanted to stop, really stop, then we'd talk about that too. Seriously. Karen, his sincerity, his unwavering support, washed over me, dissolving the last vestiges of my doubt. I knew he meant it. That was the strength of our 50-plus years together, 30 of them married. We had faced bigger storms than a dodgy alternator or a spell of homesickness. I don't want to stop, I said, and the words came out with a conviction that surprised even me. Not anymore. Tonight reminded me why this matters. Why we matter, doing this, together. Karen, I thought about the routine I'd been craving. The predictability. And I realized that while there was comfort in routine, there was also a kind of slow suffocation for a spirit that had tasted true freedom. The freedom to wake up and decide, let's chase a sunset today, the freedom to be surprised by the world, and by ourselves. Mark, so, what now, then? I asked, a hopeful grin spreading across my face. Still thinking about running for the hills, or are you up for finding some of that fresh seafood tomorrow? Karen, I laughed, a genuine, light-hearted sound that felt like a release. Fresh seafood sounds perfect, I said. And maybe we find a beach where I can actually feel the sand between my toes, not just look at it from a cliff. That night, sleep came easily to me, Karen, a deep, untroubled rest I hadn't experienced in weeks. The grayness had lifted, replaced by the lingering hues of that incredible sunset, imprinted on my mind's eye. It wasn't that the challenges of van life had magically disappeared. Vasco would still have his quirks, the search for water and dump stations would continue, and there would undoubtedly be days when the space felt too small or the weather was miserable. Karen, but something fundamental had shifted in my perspective. The sunset hadn't just been a beautiful display of nature, it had been a mirror, reflecting back to me the beauty and value of the life we had chosen. It reminded me that even after 50, especially after 50, the pursuit of joy, of awe, of new horizons, was not just a whimsical fancy but a vital part of living fully. It was about choosing to see the color, even when the world tried to present itself in shades of gray. Mark, the next morning, I woke to the sound of Karen humming as she made coffee. The good beans, again. She turned, and her smile was bright, unforced. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said. "I was thinking, there's a little fishing village called Salima marked on the map, not too far from here. Supposed to have amazing grilled fish. Fancy an early start?" Mark, my heart did a little flip. The change in her was palpable. It was like the sun had not only set spectacularly the night before but had also risen anew within her. "Salima it is," I said, grinning. "Lead the way, Captain." As we drove along the stunning Algarve coastline that morning, with the sun glinting off the turquoise water and the scent of wild herbs drifting in through the open windows, Karen, felt a renewed sense of purpose, of excitement. It wasn't a blind, naive optimism, but a more grounded, appreciative kind. An understanding that the freedom we sought wasn't freedom from challenges, but the freedom to choose our challenges, and to find the extraordinary beauty that often lay just on the other side of them. "Karen," I glanced at Mark, his hands steady on the wheel, a contented look on his face as he navigated a winding coastal road. This journey, our journey, was far from over. There would be more miles, more stories, more ups, and undoubtedly more downs. But now, I knew I was ready for them again. I had almost given up, true. But a simple, yet profoundly beautiful, sunset had called me back, reminding me that the most spectacular views often come after the hardest climbs, or in our case, the bumpiest roads. Mark, we found Salima, a charming cluster of whitewashed houses nestled in a sandy cove. Fishermen were mending nets on the beach, their colorful boats pulled up on the sand. The aroma of grilling fish was already in the air. We found a small restaurant overlooking the sea, and soon we were feasting on the freshest, most delicious sea bass we'd ever tasted, washed down with crisp vinho verde. "Karen, this," I said, savoring a mouthful of perfectly grilled fish, the salty sea breeze on my face, "is pretty perfect." "Mark, see," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Told you the Algarve had its charms." And it did. The charm wasn't just in the scenery or the food, as wonderful as they were. It was in the shared experience, the renewed connection, the quiet understanding that had blossomed in the glow of that transformative sunset. It was a reminder that sometimes, when you feel lost or weary on the road of life, all it takes is a moment to pause, to look up, and to let the beauty of the world reset your compass. Karen, that evening, we found a quiet spot overlooking a different beach, less dramatic than Cabo de São Vicente, but beautiful in its own gentle way. As another lovely, though less overtly spectacular, sunset painted the sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The crisis had passed. I hadn't just weathered it, I'd learned from it. I learned that it's okay to falter, to doubt, even in the pursuit of a dream. Sometimes, those moments of doubt are necessary to truly appreciate what you have. Mark, I put my arm around Karen as we watched the colors fade. "Glad you decided to stick around, partner," I said softly, only half joking. "Karen," I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Me too," I replied. "Me too. There are still so many sunsets to see, aren't there?" And in that moment, I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my soul, that we would be there to see them, together. The road ahead was open, full of promise, 1 mile, one story, one breathtaking sunset at a time. This life, this van life after 50, with all its imperfections and its unexpected glories, was still very much our dream. And it was wonderful,